Hello everyone. Today's case involves a woman who simply wanted to go for a walk to get some exercise on a rural country road in the Appalachian Mountains when she was kidnapped. It's one that truly began to terrify me when I looked into it, because I love to walk and I also love the countryside. And taking a walk in the countryside, having such a scenic view while you're going for a walk, just sounds honestly like a dream. But sadly, there are sick freaks out there that ruin the simplest of activities. I've seen this trend going around on TikTok where you ask someone if they'd rather be in the woods with a man or a bear. And this case will definitely make you want to choose the bear. Kristi Cornwell was born on December 20th of 1970 in Hiawassee, Georgia, to parents Joanne and Harold. She also had a brother named Richard. She'd grow up in the nearby town of Blairsville, Georgia, a small Appalachian town 100 miles north of Atlanta. She loved the outdoors, rode horses with her brother, attended church, and was a board member for the Wilderness Scouts of America for several years. In 2009, Kristi was now 38 years old. She'd worked most of her life at this point in law enforcement as a probation officer, but she'd recently wanted to change careers, so she began going back to school to become a medical technician. Kristi's love life, however, wasn't as stable. She'd been divorced 3 times over the years and was now the mother to a 15-year-old son named Brody, who she loved very dearly, and she was described as a great mother. On August 11th, 2009, around 9 p.m., Kristi decided to take an evening walk near her parents' home on Jones Creek Road in Blairsville. She took this walk a few nights a week after suffering a bad fall a few months back where she'd injured her tailbone. The walks had been helping with the pain, and the roads were filled with scenic views of farmhouses and pastures. And you may be asking, why was she going out to walk so late at night? Well, it's said that Kristi liked going out in the later evenings because it wasn't as hot out. Remember, this is Georgia in the summertime. The temperatures are going to be soaring during the day, and they're going to fall at night. And especially with the shade, it's going to be a lot cooler to go for a walk. That evening, Kristi put her shoes on and told her mother, Joanne, she was going to go for a walk. It was so normal for Kristi to do this that Joanne didn't even look up from her newspaper when she said bye to Kristi. While Kristi walked that evening, she was actually talking to her boyfriend, Douglas Davis, on her cell phone. Douglas was a pastor she met on a dating website, and they'd only been seeing each other for about 7 weeks at this point. But from all accounts from friends, family, and Douglas himself, this was a very serious 7 weeks. Everyone seemed to feel like Kristi had finally met a good man of faith and that he shared the same morals with her. Now, Kristi was only supposed to be gone on her walk for about 30 minutes and was last seen passing a church down the road. The routine walk, however, would take a turn when Kristi noticed a car was following behind her. And as soon as she noticed that, she voiced it to her boyfriend over the phone. However, just moments later, Douglas would end up hearing a struggle on the other end of the line. He'd later tell police that he heard Kristi yell, and I quote, "Don't take me," end quote, before the other end of the line went silent. Panicked at this point, Douglas stayed on the line and grabbed another phone so he could call 911. But apparently, since Douglas was in Atlanta and Kristi was kidnapped in Blairsville, the dispatcher didn't know what to do, essentially, and basically said that they couldn't help him, which is crazy. Instead, the dispatcher ended up giving Douglas a non-emergency number to the Blairsville County Sheriff's Office. But when Douglas tried that number, he got no answer either because it was probably, off hours because it was a non-emergency number, which this is honestly the worst case scenario. You're trying to get help for your loved one who is far away from you and no one is helping you. She had just been kidnapped while he was on the phone with her, and no one was seeming urgent. Douglas tried for a while to try to get contact with anyone who could help him, and eventually he would end up finding Kristi's mother's phone number and he would call Joanne. Joanne would end up picking the phone up around 9:25 p.m. to be told her daughter had been kidnapped. And police actually wouldn't be dispatched until after 10 p.m. that night. That's nearly an hour or more for Kristi's kidnapper to have taken her anywhere and done anything to her. Her mother, Joanne, saying, and I quote, "It's like time has stood still, and I'm still stuck in that night, just waiting for her to come home," end quote. Joanne would begin driving the roads that Kristi would walk, trying to locate her daughter. She'd eventually meet police at the church that Kristi would have passed by. However, no signs of a struggle were found anywhere. Kristi's brother, Richard, would end up arriving at his parents' home around 1 a.m. to help search. Douglas and Kristi's best friend, Melissa, were also already on the scene by that point, trying to help as well. Now, very soon after Kristi disappeared, her cell phone would end up being found around 3 miles from where they thought she was taken from. And it was found in the grass by a neighbor who was mowing his lawn. However, unfortunately, the person who ended up finding the phone ended up wiping the phone off, so there were no fingerprints that were able to be recovered. This information also wasn't good because it had been found 3 miles north of where Kristi was last thought to have been when she was kidnapped, which most likely meant that the kidnapper had driven north towards Tennessee, which meant Kristi could honestly be anywhere at this point, and police were still only looking in the immediate area. Richard would end up also finding one of his sister's sandals in the tall grass after searching for near exhaustion. Her headphones and glasses were also found by police in the area. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation would join the case very soon on. Missing persons posters were hung on fences around Georgia, hoping to get a tip that would lead to Kristi being found. A caretaker at the nearby church that Kristi had passed that night will go on to tell police that he had seen a light-colored sports vehicle passing the night that Kristi disappeared. This would end up sparking a memory that Douglas had from a few days prior when him and Kristi had gone for a walk and a light-colored SUV had pulled up behind them and then sped off. Authorities would search on helicopters, on foot, and with police dogs for 3 miles, and it said nearly 400 acres were searched from the area where Kristi was kidnapped. Dive teams would search surrounding lakes and rivers, and nearly 60 GBI agents would participate. But none of this was leading them any closer to finding who took Kristi.
We really want her back, and we appreciate if they would have mercy on her, and just understand that we need her back.
She is 38-year-old Kristi Cornwell of Blairsville, last seen walking here on Jones Creek Road Tuesday night a little after 9. GBI investigators say she was on her cell phone talking to her boyfriend in Atlanta.
While they were conversing on the phone, he overheard her tell him that I've got to step off the road. There's a vehicle approaching. Then he hears what he believes to be a struggle and loses contact with her at that time.
Now, a detailed search of the entire area, particularly the spot where investigators found some of Kristi's personal items. They won't give specifics, but say some of the things they found indicate there was a struggle. Here's what we know about Kristi Cornwell. She grew up in Union County. She was once a probation officer for the state, but she's now back in school studying medical lab technology, and she has a 15-year-old son.
You wouldn't have been out in here Tuesday evening, would you?
No. Authorities are now stopping all cars on and around Jones Creek Road, asking drivers if they saw anything Tuesday night. Detectives are tracking down and interviewing registered sex offenders across 4 counties as they wait for that one tip that turns into a viable lead.
And I plead to the public, anyone out there who's seen anything, heard anything, or even think they may have seen anything, now is the time to call.
However, authorities searched for only 2 weeks before they gave up, due to finding no evidence and no leads that would lead to finding Kristi. After this, Kristi's family went as far as auctioning off their lakefront vacation homes so that they could raise money to continue searching for her. They also offered a $50,000 reward. Kristi's father was thankfully a very experienced outdoorsman. I mean, they were living in the Appalachia, so he began arranging searches on his own. And her brother also owned a plane, so he ended up taking it up in the air, doing aerial searches on his own as well. Her brother Richard would end up telling Good Morning America in August that investigators seemed to be unsure if his sister's abduction was targeted because she had been a probation officer or if it was completely random. Douglas would also go on to a talk show claiming that he had been ruled out. Yet media still continued to hound him, asking him if he knew who had taken her.
CBS Atlanta's Mike Paluska just spoke to the boyfriend who says you shouldn't call him a suspect and claims a lie detector test proves it.
Yeah, Douglas Davis says he passed the test, but the big question is, did he really take a test? The GBI will not comment on whether or not he was actually given one.
You know, you never prepare yourself for the worst day of your life.
Douglas Davis was on the phone with 38-year-old Kristi Cornwell the night she disappeared. Davis says he heard a struggle, Cornwell scream, and someone abducting her. She vanished 10 days ago while walking along a Blairsville road. Throughout the entire search, people have been asking questions about Davis.
Kristi was truly a remarkable woman that I had come to grow deeply fondly of, and I wouldn't hurt her for nothing in this world. No way. Just you don't do that. Not somebody you love.
Davis says he took a lie detector test and passed. The GBI won't say if a polygraph was taken. But in the days immediately following Cornwell's reported abduction, Davis says he was in Blairsville.
I stayed on top of the mountains above where Kristi was taken for several days, praying and searching God for what I needed to do.
The relationship, according to Davis, was getting serious.
We had developed a relationship that we thought somewhere down the road was going to end up in marriage.
Despite the searches ending so soon on, it still seemed like police were actively searching for Kristi and who had taken her. because by the 1-year anniversary, police had conducted interviews at 450 houses in the Union County area. They went through every ex-con and sex offender that Kristi had ever worked with, which is something to be talked about on its own, because Kristi knew how to deal with criminals. She also had martial arts training, so everyone was very hopeful at that time that Kristi would still be found alive and that she would have been able to fight off her attacker.
On over 1,000 leads, but still have no suspects. Cornwell's boyfriend has been ruled out.
It's the worst nightmare of our lives, not knowing where your child is.
Joining me right here in studio, Kristi's boyfriend, Douglas Davis, the last person to speak with her. Also, Kristi's best friend is with us, Melissa Camp. She's in Blairsville, Georgia. Good morning, Melissa. Good morning, Douglas.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ivy.
Let me begin with you, Douglas. Do you keep playing that last phone call back over and over in your mind?
You know, it is the most horrific thing you'll ever have. It won't go away. I don't want it to, but yet it is so painful to know that the one you love, someone that you've grown to be so fond of in so short a period of time.
You've been dating 6 weeks?
Yeah, something like that. But it seemed like a lifetime. Every day was full of joy and full of our relationship, and just that brief moment that is just snatched away from you. It sends a message so loud that we have just the day, just the moment, and we need to live it fully, as Kristi did.
I can't imagine being on your end of that phone call, certainly not on hers, but being in such a helpless position as yours. What details can you share with us about that phone call?
Well, we had been talking about plans for the upcoming week. She was frustrated with her school where she was going to. They had lost her application for fall semester, and she was having to go back to deal with that. And so we were just talking about all those events, but it turned a positive. She turned a positive about it. We can have dinner on Thursday night. And I said, "Way cool, that's good. I'll make it my plan." And then there's a car coming. Hang on just a minute. And then all of these things began to take place. And I had made a commitment to her just 2 days earlier.
What do you mean all of these things?
What was happening? The abduction began.
It was clear to you what was going on?
Her first sounds made that very clear to me. It was unmistakable what I was hearing going on. And
what were her first sounds?
She was screaming. And you knew immediately what was happening. And I was helpless. I'd made a commitment to her just a few days earlier that I would protect her with my life. And yet right then, there was nothing. I was 2.5 hours away, might have been 1,000,000 miles away.
Oh my goodness.
And I couldn't go. But you want to do something. And I was just frantic trying to find the solution, and yet there was none.
Let me bring in Melissa. Melissa, when I think about Kristi, I don't know her, but the first thing that always pops in my mind is she's a mother. Is she very close with her son?
As close as any mother could be.
What does she mean to you?
The person that you want to call first when anything good or bad happens in your life. And we just had a closeness that I prayed for him moving to Blairsville. And I was just so thankful to have her as a friend.
Now that they've called off the search, is there a part of you that's preparing for the worst?
No, we'll never give up hope.
Douglas,
never.
You're clinging to this. This is a Bible. You seem to be praying as Melissa's talking. You're hopeful too?
Absolutely. She's a giver. And she reached out to me days after her abduction with this beautiful book from My Utmost for His Highest from Oswald Chambers. I will get to know that every day when I read my devotion in this book that I know that she first read it. And she wanted it to help me with my ministry and my life. And it's a blessing to know that someone that you meet was more concerned about you than they were herself. Kristi is the type of woman that cares about herself more than anybody. And she'd be right now worried more about Melissa and about me than she would herself. That's who Kristi is.
Melissa, let me give you the last word. What would you like to say to the people who are with Kristi right now?
Just we're begging, pleading, whatever it takes. If it's money, we'll get it. We just desperately need her back. Her son, her family. She has so many people that loves her. If you've loved anybody in your life, please have mercy on her. And Kristi, we love you. You know that. We know God is taking care of you, and we just plead with everything that we are and have that we can have her back.
Now, this is when a bunch of different women would begin to come forward claiming that they had also either been attacked or attempted to be attacked by a similar man. One woman would end up contacting police from North Carolina claiming that she had been walking along the side of a road one day when a vehicle approached her from behind and ended up hitting her just hard enough to knock her over. This vehicle was allegedly a light-colored SUV, very similar to the vehicle that the church caretaker claimed to have seen. This is a sketch of the suspect that the woman seen that day who had hit her, and it actually ended up bringing in a lot of tips, including another woman who claimed that 2 months before Kristi was abducted would say she was fixing her car, which had broken down on the side of the road, when a man matching the sketch came up from behind her and started attacking her. Now, thankfully, this woman was able to fight off the attacker, and she ended up getting a really good look at him, and because of that, it resulted in this sketch that was even more detailed of the man, front of his face, and we also have a side profile of the man. And then some very strange things began to happen. January 5th of 2010, copies of a letter would begin to show up at the Blairsville Police Department, written by a grandmother who was worried that the suspect may be her grandson. The anonymous letter reading, and I quote, "I was horrified to see a newspaper photo of a man that looks just like my 27-year-old grandson. He drives a white Nissan Xterra with black bars on the front. My grandson arrived at my home in Western North Carolina on Saturday, August 1st, 2009, to visit and help me with some needed home repairs. Each day after work, my grandson would leave for 4 to 5 hours and return around 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. On Tuesday, August 11th, he did not return until 7 a.m. the next morning. He returned with some scratches on his face and left side of his neck. When I asked what happened, he said he was in a fight and was ready to go back home. I paid my grandson for his help on August 12th, 2009, and he left. According to my daughter, he did not arrive home until Saturday, August 15th. I've tried to ignore the chain of coincidences surrounding my grandson's 12-day stay with me, but can barely eat or sleep. My suspicions are only strengthened by discovering the similar newspaper articles in areas near his Florida residence." End quote. And then it just goes on from there in the letter about how she doesn't have proof of this. But either way, just wow. It's very scary. Very strange that this alleged grandson was out all night the night that Kristi disappeared and then returned home with scratches on him. But also how very brave and scary for this grandmother to have come forward, albeit anonymous. The only issue was, because it was anonymous, police literally couldn't have any way to go off of this, which also meant that no one knew if this was a hoax or not. And it seemed like every time they felt like they were going to get a little bit closer to finding Kristi, it would just blow up in their face. Joanne would go on to create a video with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation that ended up being put up on YouTube. And in this video, she is pleading for answers, trying to connect to this anonymous grandmother out there to please come forward.
Joanne Cornwell, Kristi Cornwell's mother. Kristi was abducted on August 11, 2009 in Union County, Georgia. We don't know where she is. She's been gone almost 6 months now, and I am in a nightmare every day. I'm so worried about, is she okay? Does she have enough food? Is she being abused? Is she cold? And I want to talk to the grandmother that wrote the anonymous letter to the Union County, Georgia and Cherokee County, North Carolina Sheriff's Office, saying that she had suspicions that her grandson may have been involved in Kristi's disappearance. We have a lot in common. We have a bond. We both are mothers. We're both grandmothers. And I certainly know how you feel about your grandson. I love my grandson and all of my grandchildren every bit as much as I love my own children. So I know how hard this is for you. Your suspicions are not just a coincidence. There was a time in early August that your grandson was visiting you. And I know you're really concerned. You realize that the sketch of the Ranger, North Carolina suspect and the vehicle looked much like what your grandson did and what he drove. It is not for us to prove that your grandson had anything to do with this. That is law enforcement's job. but I know that you are struggling and so concerned for your grandson like I am for Kristi. I know it's hard to eat, hard to sleep for you, just like it is for me. Our lives will forevermore be bound with this abduction of Kristi. Whether your grandson had anything to do with it or not, you're concerned that he did. And so I just ask for you to come forward and give law enforcement the information they need, and then let them prove or disprove his innocence or guilt. I really feel for you. I pray that you can feel how I feel, and please come forward. We need your help desperately.
Now, sadly, nothing came of this video. This alleged grandmother would never come forward, which, kind of makes you wonder even more if this was all just a hoax, although a very, very accurate and scary one. A year and a half later, on New Year's Day, 2011, Kristi's brother Richard would make a gruesome discovery while conducting one of the many searches that the family had done over the year. Richard had gone so far as quitting his job so that he could search for his sister. He was that dedicated to finding her. Police would end up tipping Richard off to look in a 2-mile area of Union County. In that area, he would end up finding burned skeletal remains that were hidden under leaves in a hilly rural area. And this body would turn out to belong to Kristi. She would be found just 9 miles from where she had been kidnapped. Medical examiners tried to determine how Kristi had been killed. However, since her remains were so deteriorated and they'd also been burned, they were unable to.
And now to that missing persons case. It was nearly 17 months ago when Cornwell was abducted near her Georgia home while on the phone with her boyfriend. Family members made pleas in Georgia and South Carolina for anyone with information to come forward.
Well, tonight their worst fears have been confirmed. News 4's Mandy Gaither is on the story and joins us now. Mandy, how did she die?
Investigators say she was murdered, but by an undetermined assault. Cornwell's remains were found burned and partially buried in a rural area about 9 miles from where she disappeared in Blairsville, Georgia.
For nearly 17 months, Kristi Cornwell's brother and mother had been seeking answers into the 38-year-old's disappearance. That search ended New Year's Day.
We're thankful that Kristi can now have a proper burial that she deserves.
It was Cornwell's brother, Richard, who found his sister's remains after getting information from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations.
The perpetrator had set the remains of Kristi Cornwell on fire.
But this all meant that Kristi's case now went from a missing persons case to a murder case. Richard later saying, and I quote, "We're thankful that Kristi can now have a proper burial that she deserves," end quote. I can't imagine how traumatizing that must be for Richard to have found his sister's body. I can't imagine. My heart goes out to him. Her mother, Joanne, saying, and I quote, "We didn't want it to end this way, but that's the way it is. We can bring her home now. I know in my heart she's in heaven and we'll see her again. So that's what's going to make me be able to go on," end quote. Now, interestingly enough, police had said they actually planned to search that area that Richard was searching in the next week. And this was because cell phone records allegedly showed that a man by the name of James Carringer had been in that area that same night that Kristi was kidnapped. James Carringer was a 42-year-old real estate appraiser from Young Harris, and he would also now be their prime suspect. Remember how I said that police were suspicious that Kristi's disappearance may be connected to some of these other experiences that women were having, being attacked by a man driving a light-colored Nissan Xterra? Well, guess what? James also drove a Nissan Xterra. However, his was black. Now, if James was responsible for Kristi's kidnapping and murder, he took those answers to the grave. Because in May of that year, James would unalive himself after a standoff with Atlanta police, who were trying to arrest him on charges of SAer and kidnapping of one of his teenage relatives in Gilmer County. Police in Montgomery, Alabama would also come forward and claim that James had tried to kidnap a 10-year-old little girl during a church egg hunt just days earlier. He was actually captured on church surveillance video, luring the little girl to his truck before she escaped and ran away. Just what a sick individual. And I'm so glad that that little girl got away. Police saying, and I quote, "We believe that he was a career criminal and we do not know how much harm he has done," end quote. That is scary. So scared to think that this man could have many, many victims out there. Many who we do not know about. Maybe in cases of SAer or maybe in murder cases as well, where we don't know who killed this person or kidnapped this person and their body hasn't been found, but James Carringer maybe have been involved. An anonymous source would also call into police, telling the police that they needed to look into James Carringer. It would turn out that James only lived 18 miles from Kristi's parents' home. And get this, James also owned a white and a silver Nissan Xterra. He had 3 of them, all in different colors. The same vehicles that the church caretaker described, the women described who were attacked. So could that mean that James was the one who was attacking all of these women, but he was using different vehicles in different attacks so that hopefully it wouldn't have gotten linked to him, however it eventually would? Seems a little too coincidental to me that this man owns 3 different colors of the exact same vehicle, and everyone's spotting that exact same vehicle in all of these situations. Those closest to James would also tell police that James would often leave the area and turn his cell phone off for hours, days, and weeks sometimes, not telling them where he was going.
Also, in conducting the background on Carringer, we obtained his cell phone records. Those cell phone records revealed that on the night that Kristi Cornwell disappeared, that Carringer had been in the Union County area and that his cell phone had pinged off a tower located up in North Union County.
Agents say Carringer is their prime suspect but can't definitively say he's Cornwell's murderer. Her family just thankful to have her with them again.
Now, in my opinion, with the limited information we do know about James, he just seems like an overall sick individual. I also heard that in the days before James ended his own life during that police standoff, his daughter had finally left the home, and I think it was a stepdaughter or some other young girl in his life ended up also leaving, which police have said might have led James to spiral because he was losing control of the people he was controlling in his life. But also makes me wonder if he also victimized all of these people as well, because we do have the claim that he had SA'd a teenage relative. So it's just, what a sick, sick person. And James actually would leave an unaliving note that would reflect some similar patterns that we see in people like this. In this note, James would claim that he was SA'd when he was 10 years old by a neighbor, but he didn't go into much other detail regarding, any of his other victims, especially Kristi. He never, admitted to do anything to her or leaving any evidence in this note that police could have used to connect him to Kristi. But we do often see that cycle of abuse, unfortunately, with people like this. It does make me feel bad for the 10-year-old version of him, who I do believe probably was SA'd by this neighbor that he claimed to have been. But unfortunately, I don't think that excuses the acts that he'd eventually go on to do, because there are plenty of people out there who are unfortunately SA'd, but do not continue the cycle. But what do you all think? From the evidence that we do have, it truly does all kind of, in my opinion, lead to James. It does really seem like he was involved in all these attacks. He owned the same vehicles that were spotted and all of the colors that were spotted. He has a criminal history and a past of doing similar things. He lived very close by in the area of where Kristi was abducted. He has a pattern of turning his phone off so that police couldn't track him, so he could go allegedly commit these acts. He seemed to be quite a smart individual in that regard. And then in the end, it seems like he just couldn't take it anymore and he wasn't going to be put in prison, I guess. So he does seem to fit the bill. But that letter from that grandmother is also just so very strange to me. Again, it may have all just been a hoax, but it was just so accurate and so eerie. I guess at the end of the day, James took himself out, so he will not be able to create any more victims out there, which I guess is in some way a positive. It means that that area is safer now that he is not around anymore. And I am very glad that Kristi's family was able to lay her to rest, because not knowing can sometimes be one of the worst things. This case technically isn't solved, but we seem to kind of have someone that really does seem good for it. But at the end of the day, it truly isn't solved, so Kristi's case is still kind of left open-ended. We may never know what exactly happened to Kristi, what happened to her after she was kidnapped. Unfortunately, from the patterns we see with men like this, she was most likely SA'd and then murdered, which is just awful, especially since he seems to have a history of SA. And I am truly hoping that he burned her body after she was dead and not while she was alive, because that is a death I wouldn't wish upon anyone. That is just completely awful. But my heart goes out to Kristi's family. She was a mother that was just trying to turn her life around. She seemed to be living quite a good life. She had just met a really good man. She had a son that she loved, who seemed to be an awesome son. She had family that loved her. She just wanted to enjoy the outdoors and get some exercise. And some sick freak took everything away from her. It took all of that away from her family as well. So that brings me back to what I said in the beginning. If you'd rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear, well, cases like these really make you think that you'd rather be stuck in the forest with a bear. But let's have a conversation down below. Is there any more information on this case that I don't know about and I didn't include in this video? Let's chat about it down below. And as I said, my heart goes out to Kristi's family. I truly hope they can finally get answers one day definitively, but at least they have something. They have a lot more than some families do, unfortunately. But I think the lesson I guess we can learn from this is always have a buddy system. Don't go out on walks late at night alone. I used to do that when I was in my early 20s, and I don't do that anymore. It used to just feel so freeing, and the air was a lot cooler. I completely get Kristi's logic with it. But unfortunately, there are individuals out there who make it not possible. It's very sad. So again, I think the biggest thing we can learn is if you are gonna go do something like that and go for a walk later at night, just have a buddy system. If she had had someone with her, especially a man, is most likely that this man, if it was James, wouldn't have stopped. But hindsight is 20/20. As always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.